The night air over the lunar pavilion was sharp enough to slice through silk. Lanterns floated in the dark like captured moons, their pale light painting the crowd below in silver and shadow. Sarah could taste the metallic tang of fear on her tongue as the ceremony unfolded around her like a carefully crafted trap. Omegas stood in a line, white gowns gleaming under the moonlight, heads bowed as alphas prowled the marble floor below. She wasn't supposed to move. She was supposed to stand still, be looked at, chosen, and taken. But she had never been good at playing the part she was given. Sarah's heart pounded so loud she could barely hear the ceremonial music. Somewhere to the left, a young woman was claimed, a trembling hand seized, a name announced. The crowd roared its approval. Another girl cried softly as she was dragged away, one by one, like prizes in a cruel auction. Her pulse quickened as her turn drew closer. She scanned the shadows near the colonnade, and there, exactly where he'd been earlier, sat the hooded man. She had seen him that afternoon in the far gardens. A stranger dressed in rags, sitting too still to be ordinary. The memory of that low, amused voice curled through her like smoke. "Lost, little Omega?" he'd said then. She hadn't answered. She hadn't dared to ask why a beggar's stillness felt like a warning. Now he was here, in the shadows, watching. Her throat tightened. If she kissed him, if she claimed him, the old law would protect her. A self-chosen mate could not be refused, not even by the king himself. It was a loophole whispered about in servant corridors, the last hope for girls like her. Someone behind her nudged. Her name would be called any heartbeat now. Sira of Silver Creek, Omega, nothing. She could almost hear it, sharp and final. No. The thought ripped through her like a scream. She would not let some alpha she'd never met cage her life in his hands. Without thinking, she broke from the line. The gasp that followed felt like a living thing. Hundreds of eyes turned toward her as she fled down the steps, silk skirts catching the moonlight like a flare. Voices rose, guards shouting, nobles murmuring, but she didn't stop. Her world narrowed to that shadow beneath the stone archway. He didn't move as she approached, just watched, head tilted beneath the hood, as though waiting for her to make the first move. She could hear her own ragged breathing as she stopped in front of him, trembling. Up close, he didn't smell like a beggar. He smelled like thunder breaking through cedar wood, a scent too sharp, too commanding. Her pulse faltered. Her wolf stirred restlessly beneath her skin, as if recognizing something she didn't yet understand. No time to second-guess. She grabbed his face with both hands, lifted onto her toes, and pressed her mouth against his. The world detonated. Lightning surged through her veins, wild and hot. A shock tore through her body so fierce it made her gasp against his lips. His hand caught her waist, not gently, not uncertainly, but like a man who knew exactly how to hold what was his. His mouth moved against hers, no longer passive, claiming her with a power that sent her knees buckling. The crowd behind them roared, scandal and disbelief colliding into a single sound. Her heart hammered as she pulled back, breathless. The hood slipped away. Golden eyes stared down at her, steady and bright as a predator's in firelight. Sharp, aristocratic lines carved a face she had seen on banners, in whispers, in the stories of a king too distant to touch. A crown didn't sit on his head, but it didn't have to. His presence was a crown. His lips curved slowly, like a wolf savoring the hunt. "Well, little Omega," he said, his voice low and smooth. "You've just claimed the Alpha King." The world went still. For one heartbeat, she stood frozen white silk, trembling hands, and the taste of a stranger's kiss still burning on her mouth. Then his voice rolled over the crowd again, louder, darker, carrying power in every syllable. "I accept." Every wolf in the pavilion lowered their gaze. Guards froze mid-step. The mate bond still crackled through her, hot and relentless, as his fingers tightened against her waist. She had planned to disappear into a quiet life far from the ceremony. Instead, she had tied her fate to the most dangerous wolf alive. She had kissed a beggar. She had claimed a king, and there was no going back. The summons arrived with the morning frost, its wax seal cold enough to burn. Sarah stared at the envelope on the kitchen table as though it might open its mouth and bite her. A single stamped sigil, the crowned wolf, glimmered faintly in the dawn light. Everyone in Silver Creek knew what that seal meant. Her fingers trembled as she broke it open. Sarah, of Silver Creek Pack, you are hereby summoned to attend the annual royal mating ceremony at the Lunar Pavilion, Lycaon Capital. Attendance mandatory. Failure to comply is treason. No warmth, no mercy, just a demand. She folded the letter carefully, like holding something that could shatter her life and maybe already had. Around her, the servants' hall buzzed softly. Other Omegas had already received their letters. They whispered in corners with wide eyes, clutching small bags, pretending they were excited when everyone knew the truth. Excitement wasn't the word for what waited in Lycaon. It was fear, wrapped in silk and law. Sarah pressed the letter to her chest, fighting the ache in her throat. Her mother had died the day she was born. Her father, a warrior, had fallen in some border skirmish no one bothered to remember. She had grown up in corners, quiet, unnoticed. A girl with a mop in her hands and a name no one cared to say twice. Invisibility had always been her shield, but invisibility didn't protect you from the king's summons. 21, whispered Mina, one of the other kitchen girls, as she passed. That's the age. No one escapes it. Sarah didn't reply. She didn't need to. They all knew the stories. The annual mating ceremony wasn't about love. It was about alliances, power, bloodlines. Alphas from across the kingdom gathered in the pavilion to choose their mates from the pool of unmated wolves. To refuse was treason. To resist was death. And Omegas like Sarah? They were easy prey. She remembered Mira's smile. Once, her friend's laughter had filled the laundry room like summer air. 3 years ago, Mira had gone to the ceremony and returned different. She never spoke about what happened. She didn't have to. The bruises told their own story. Sarah gripped the table until her knuckles ached. She would not end up like Mira. She would not let someone's claws close around her life. She didn't know how yet, but she would find a way out. That afternoon, while folding linens in the upper hallway, she overheard 2 palace guards talking near the archway. "The king'll be there," one guard said, lowering his voice, as if the walls could listen. "He always is," the other muttered. "In disguise, too. Man likes to walk among his people like a shadow. Nobody knows which face is his until the end." Sarah froze mid-fold. In disguise? She turned her back slowly, pretending not to hear. But inside her head, something sharp and reckless clicked into place. The old law. It was an ancient rule older than the crown itself. If a wolf claimed a mate of their own free will before the ceremony, no one, not even the Alpha King, could override that bond. It was sacred, binding. A loophole whispered about in servant quarters, but rarely used. If she claimed someone first, if she found someone safe, someone beneath the notice of alphas, she could escape. The idea burned through her like a spark in dry grass. By the time the pack carriage rolled out 3 mornings later, Sarah had made her plan. She sat squeezed between 2 trembling girls, staring out at the road winding toward Lycaon. The kingdom's capital rose from the distance like a promise wrapped in danger. White walls, silver spires, flags bearing the crowned wolf. It looked like a dream and felt like a trap. Inside the city, everything smelled sharper, cleaner, too controlled. The streets teemed with strangers in elegant clothing, warriors in black leather, merchants shouting over the noise. They were herding thousands of girls like her into the palace, a flood of soft voices and frightened eyes. The Omega Wing was nothing like the legends. Cramped beds, stone walls that echoed with whispers, dozens of girls wrapped in thin blankets, pretending not to cry. Outside, the pavilion loomed silver and obsidian under the stars, waiting to swallow them whole. Sarah lay awake that night, staring at the cracked ceiling. Every breath felt like a countdown. She didn't know his face. She didn't know how she'd do it. But she would find someone. A stranger with nothing to lose. Someone who could set her free. And if she failed, she would be claimed anyway. Her pulse quickened at the thought. But this time it wasn't fear alone that filled her chest. It was determination. Tomorrow night, she promised herself, would not be the end of her story. It would be the beginning. The lunar pavilion shone like a blade under the full moon. High white columns rose into the dark sky, draped in silver banners that caught the night wind and whispered like spirits. Lanterns lined the marble pathways, their flames shivering in the cold. It should have looked beautiful. To Sarah, it looked like a cage dressed in silk. They bathed the Omegas at dawn, poured water scented with crushed lilies over their skin, combed their hair until it gleamed, and wrapped them in gowns of white silk. The scent of perfume clung too sweetly to the air, making her stomach turn. Everything about this night was soft on the surface and sharp underneath. Servants moved around her like ghosts, braiding silver thread into her auburn hair, whispering to each other but never to the girls. One woman, older, with tired eyes, leaned down as she fastened Sarah's bodice and whispered, "The pretty ones go first. The smart ones hide it." Sarah didn't answer. She didn't have the luxury of pretty or smart. She had a plan. A reckless, desperate, fragile plan. When the preparations ended, they were marched out into the night in perfect rows, dozens of them, white gowns trailing like a river of snow down the pavilion steps. Warriors and nobles filled the surrounding courtyard. Their eyes swept over the girls like they were inspecting goods. The air smelled of power and perfume and something faintly metallic fear. Sarah's pulse drummed in her throat as the first name was called. A girl with golden hair was chosen immediately by a broad-shouldered alpha with a cruel smile. She didn't resist. She couldn't. The guards would have dragged her either way. Another girl was claimed, and another. The pavilion filled with cheers, declarations, and the soft sounds of muffled sobs. Sarah's turn crept closer. She forced her gaze away from the circling alphas and toward the colonnade at the far edge of the courtyard. Shadows pooled between the columns like spilled ink, and there, just as she'd hoped, he was sitting. The hooded man. Ragged cloak, torn boots, too still. His face still hidden in the shadows. The sight of him hit her like cold air after drowning. Her plan wasn't clever. It wasn't even safe. But it was hers. Her breath quickened. She remembered his voice from the gardens, low, steady, and too amused for a man dressed in rags. Lost. Little Omega? The memory slid through her like smoke. No beggar spoke like that. No beggar held still like stone. But it didn't matter. She didn't need to trust him. She just needed him to be there. Another name called. Another girl claimed. And then Sarah's. Her name cracked through the air like a whip. Sarah of Silver Creek. The eyes of hundreds turned to her. She felt their weight press against her skin. Alphas shifted in their places, scenting weakness, calculating their moves. The guards tightened their stance, ready to drag her forward if she froze. Her heart beat once, twice. Then she moved. One sharp breath and she broke from the line. Gasps tore through the crowd. Her silk skirts snapped behind her like white fire as she sprinted down the marble steps, dodging a startled guard. Someone shouted for her to stop, but their voices blurred into nothing. All she saw was the hooded figure sitting so still at the edge of the pavilion. Her pulse roared in her ears as she reached him. He didn't stand, didn't even flinch, just tilted his head a little, like a wolf watching prey wander closer to its own choosing. The scent hit her again, storm air and cedarwood. Not the stink of poverty, but the weight of power. Her wolf stirred uneasily beneath her skin, pushing against her chest. Sarah didn't give herself time to think. If she thought, she'd run back, and someone would take her, and she'd lose everything. She grabbed his jaw. Her hands shook, but her grip was real. She tilted his head up, stood on her toes, and kissed him. The world exploded. It wasn't like touching a stranger. It was like being caught in lightning. A surge of heat and power rushed through her chest, knocking the air out of her lungs. The mate bond flared awake with a force that made her gasp against his mouth. His hand snapped to her waist, not gentle, not questioning, but claiming, and his mouth moved against hers. The kiss deepened like a storm rolling over open water. She felt his strength through the layers of ragged fabric, the quiet authority under the disguise. The crowd's silence shattered. Nobles shouted. Guards froze mid-step. The other Omegas stared with wide, horrified eyes. The hood fell back. Golden eyes gleamed down at her, bright and unforgiving, like they'd been waiting for this moment all along. A scar cut along his jawline, a mark every wolf in the kingdom knew. Sarah's stomach plummeted. She had kissed not a beggar. She had kissed the king. His lips curved in a slow, dangerous smile. "Well, little Omega," he said softly, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "You've just claimed the Alpha King." And before she could even breathe, he turned his face to the stunned crowd. "I accept." Power rolled through the pavilion like thunder. Wolves bowed their heads. Even the air felt heavy. His hand on her waist tightened, not like a stranger's, like something inevitable. Sarah's plan had worked, but not in the way she'd imagined. She hadn't escaped the ceremony. She had set fire to it. The world seemed to split down the middle after those 3 words. I accept. The cheers, the shouts, the confusion, they all melted into a ringing silence that wrapped itself around Sarah like a second skin. The king's hand was still firm at her waist, his golden eyes fixed on her, as though the rest of the world had ceased to exist. She couldn't breathe. She wasn't sure she even remembered how. The guards didn't move. No one did. His voice had been an order, and in this kingdom, the Alpha King's word was law. One look from him kept hundreds of wolves frozen in place. Then he began to walk, not hurried, not uncertain. Each step was measured, deliberate, the kind of walk that made the world part for him. And because his hand was at her waist, Sarah walked too, stumbling at first, then following, because the weight of his presence left no other choice. The pavilion's marble steps fell away behind them. Torches flickered against the black sky. Her gown whispered against the stone. Every sound too loud in the tense silence. She caught glimpses of faces in the crowd, shock, disbelief, fury. High-ranking alphas stared like they'd just watched their best cards get swept off the table. Omegas whispered like wind through the trees. The king had been claimed. By her. Sarah's pulse rattled in her chest. She'd expected to be dragged back, to be punished, to die, maybe. But not this, never this. His warmth burned through the thin silk of her dress as they crossed the courtyard. He didn't speak to her. He didn't need to. His silence said everything. You started this. Now follow. They entered the palace through a set of iron doors so tall they seemed to scrape the night. Inside, the world changed. The rough, noisy pavilion was replaced by quiet corridors of dark wood, soft torchlight, and air that smelled like old power. It was colder here, but his hand was still on her waist, steady, like a tether she couldn't cut. 2 guards bowed as they passed, opening a pair of heavy doors. Sarah stepped into a room unlike anything she'd ever seen. A vast chamber with high ceilings, a wall of glass that framed the moon, furs spilling across polished floors, and weapons glinting on the walls like silent sentinels. His private wing. She stopped just inside the threshold, but he kept walking. When he turned, the hooded rags were gone, discarded somewhere between the pavilion and this place. In their place was a black shirt that clung to broad shoulders and a quiet, terrible authority that filled the room even when he didn't speak. Sarah backed up until her shoulders met the wall. "This is a mistake," she managed, her voice hoarse. "I didn't know." His mouth curved, not cruelly, but with the quiet amusement of a predator who'd been watching the prey circle closer all along. "A beggar?" he drawled. "Yes. I gathered that from your enthusiastic claim." She flushed, but didn't look away. "I'll renounce it. Tomorrow. I'll tell them it was a mistake." "You can't." His voice softened, but it didn't lose its weight. "You felt it. The bond. The bond." The word made her chest tighten. He stepped closer, not fast, not threatening, but like gravity itself. She felt the shift in the air before she felt his presence. "Don't lie to me, Sarah. When you kissed me, your wolf recognized mine." Her breath caught. "How do you know my name?" "I make it my business to know everyone in my kingdom," he replied smoothly. "Especially invisible omegas who sneak into gardens with rebellion in their eyes." Her pulse stuttered. He had seen her. "And I," he added, lowering his voice, "wanted to see what you would do when the world cornered you." Sarah forced herself to lift her chin. "Then you know I don't want this." His expression hardened, not cruel, but sharp as iron. "What you want ceased to matter the moment you invoked the old law. Before the entire kingdom." His golden eyes caught the torchlight. "You've claimed me, little Omega, and I accepted. That cannot be undone." The words fell like stone into a still pond. He crossed the room, closing the space between them with quiet power. She could feel the heat radiating from him now, and the mate bond pulsed against her skin, alive and relentless. She hated how her body responded, how the wolf inside her reached for him, even as her mind screamed no. "There are only two paths now," he said softly. "You accept the bond, and you are protected under my name. Or," his voice lowered, "you reject it. I will make the world believe you're dead. I'll give you a new name, a quiet life somewhere no one can find you. But your wolf will ache every time the bond calls. You will never shift without giving yourself away." It wasn't a threat. It was the truth. "You have until dawn," he said finally. "My chambers are through that door. The bed is yours tonight. I'll take the couch." Her head snapped up. "You're the king. You have a couch?" That earned a small, quiet huff of laughter. "Many. I sleep on none of them." He turned away, leaving her standing against the wall, breathless, heart-hammering. She moved to the massive bed on uncertain legs. The sheets smelled faintly of cedar and something darker, storm air, just like him. She lay down, staring at the ceiling as the pulse of the mate bond thudded between them like a heartbeat that wouldn't let her go. She had kissed a stranger. She had claimed a king. And now the night itself was waiting for her answer. Dawn came like a thief, sliding into the room through the tall glass windows and cutting through Sarah's sleep like a blade. She woke, tangled in silk sheets that smelled faintly of cedarwood and storm, the same scent that had wrapped around her the night before. For one breath, she forgot where she was. Then memory rushed back like a cold wave. The ceremony, the kiss, the king. Her stomach twisted as she sat up. Across the room, Constantine was already awake, seated in a leather chair near the hearth, the morning light sharpening the edges of his face. He wasn't wearing a crown. He didn't need one. Authority sat on him like second skin. He didn't look at her right away. He simply sipped something from a silver cup, as if this morning wasn't the aftermath of the biggest scandal in years. Only when she shifted on the bed did his gaze slide to her, golden and steady. "You're awake," he said, voice low but clear. Not a question, an observation. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself, even though she was still fully dressed from the night before. I didn't sleep well. Few do, he replied. He placed the cup down and stood. Every movement was measured, deliberate. Wolves like him didn't need to raise their voices to fill a room. They just existed, and the world adjusted. Sarah's throat tightened as she watched him approach. About last night, she blurted, before he could speak first. I still haven't... I know. He stopped a few feet away from her. You have until tonight to decide. His calm made her uneasy, like a predator that didn't need to chase. Before she could answer, the door opened and a guard bowed deeply. Your Majesty, the council is waiting. Council, of course. A mate bond wasn't just personal, it was political. Every alpha and noble in the kingdom would have something to say about the king being claimed by a low-ranking Omega. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. Constantine's gaze softened for the briefest moment. You'll stand beside me. Her heart stuttered. What? They'll want to see you, he said simply. Hear you breathe. We don't give them silence, little Omega. We give them certainty. Sarah swallowed. She wanted to refuse. She wanted to crawl back into the blankets and pretend none of this was real. But refusing wasn't an option. Not anymore. Moments later, she found herself walking beside him through wide stone corridors. Every servant they passed lowered their eyes. Every guard straightened their stance. She felt their stares like cold fingers on her skin. Rumors traveled faster than wolves. They already knew who she was, or at least what she'd done. The council chamber was enormous. A crescent table carved from obsidian stretched across the room. The walls were lined with banners, each one bearing a crest of a powerful pack. Dozens of alphas filled the seats, their scents clashing like thunderclouds. At the center sat Magnus, the king's beta broad, gray-streaked hair, a scar down his jaw, eyes sharp and suspicious. To his right, Lady Isadora, all elegance and venom wrapped in silk. And to his left, Lord Theron, the oldest and most dangerous of them all, his voice rumored to sway entire regions. Constantine didn't hesitate. He took his seat at the head of the table, and without looking back, lifted his hand. Sarah stepped forward, every heartbeat too loud, and stood at his side. She's an Omega, someone muttered. An unranked servant, another hissed. She claimed him, a third whispered. Before the ceremony, the room felt like the edge of a knife. Magnus leaned forward, voice low and gravelly. An Omega queen? The court will eat her alive. Constantine didn't flinch. Then I'll burn the court down. The words rippled through the room like fire finding dry wood. Silence fell, taut and uneasy. Lady Isadora was the first to recover. Her smile was as sharp as glass. How unexpected, she purred. The king has such unique taste. Sarah said nothing. Her heart pounded in her ears, but she held her ground. She wouldn't let them smell her fear. Not these wolves. Lord Theron's voice rolled through the chamber, low and slow. An Omega has never sat on the Queen's throne. There are concerns. Translation: we don't want you. Before Constantine could speak, something reckless unfurled inside her. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the part of her that had spent her entire life invisible. She stepped forward slightly, lifting her chin. You're right, she said softly. I was invisible. Nobody ever noticed me, which meant I saw everything. Dozens of heads turned. Sarah's voice didn't shake. I know which alphas cheat at cards, which betas steal from the treasury, which warriors sleep with their commander's mates. She let her gaze fall squarely on Lord Theron. And which council head has gambling debts with the Eastern packs? The room went still. Lord Theron's jaw tightened, just barely. Constantine leaned back in his chair, golden eyes burning with quiet amusement. Interesting, he murmured. Isadora's smile faltered. Magnus grunted. The council, a storm seconds ago, fell into stunned silence. Constantine's hand brushed the arm of his chair, casual, but firm. "This is the Omega who claimed me," he said softly. "I suggest you remember her name." For the first time, Sarah didn't feel like prey. For the first time, she felt dangerous. The next 7 days unfolded like the tightening of a net. Not all at once, but slowly thread by thread until Sarah couldn't tell where the bond ended and the world began. Mornings were the worst. She'd wake before dawn in a room that wasn't hers, wrapped in silk sheets that smelled like cedar wood and storm. On the first morning, she tried to pretend she was anywhere else. By the second, she knew pretending wouldn't save her. Constantine kept his promise. He didn't touch her, didn't demand anything. He slept on the long black couch near the window, a king folded into quiet shadows. But he watched her with those golden eyes, steady, unreadable, like a wolf who could wait forever. On the third morning, she caught him looking at her as the first light spilled through the windows. Not like an enemy, not like a prize, just looking. She didn't know what unsettled her more, his silence or the way her wolf leaned toward it. Afternoons belonged to politics. He made her walk beside him through the palace like she belonged there. Courtiers fell silent when she passed. Servants stared. Alphas whispered into their cups. Constantine ignored them all. In the strategy room, he sat at the head of a carved oak table, maps and scrolls laid out like battle scars. And there, amid discussions of borders, trade routes, and pack alliances, he made her listen, learn, speak. "This is how power works," he told her on the second day, tracing a line across the map. "Everyone wants something. They will pretend they don't. They'll pretend you don't matter. That's their first mistake." "And my second?" she asked quietly. His mouth tilted slightly, just enough to make her heartbeat quicken. "Believing them." Each day she learned something new. The names of nobles, the weight of alliances, the sound of lies disguised as honeyed words. She found she had a sharp ear for secrets, perhaps, because she'd spent her entire life listening without being seen. And Constantine noticed. Evenings were when the world softened. Banquets, royal gatherings, public appearances, she was at his side for them all. They never spoke about it, but his hand always found its way to the small of her back or her waist, warm and steady, as if daring anyone to challenge what had been sealed at the pavilion. The first night, the weight of his touch made her stiffen. By the fourth, she hated how much she noticed when it wasn't there. Every glance, every whisper, every step was measured. The kingdom was watching, and somewhere between the noise of court politics and the quiet of midnight, she realized she was no longer just the Omega who kissed a stranger. She was the woman everyone whispered about, the girl who claimed a king. And Constantine, he was still waiting, watching, patient as a storm that knows it will eventually break. But nights were something else entirely. They would talk. She told him about Silver Creek, about laundry rooms that smelled like bleach and crushed apples, about Mira, whose laughter died after the ceremony, about the quiet fury of being invisible. He told her about becoming king at 22, when his father's blood was still on the throne, about the wars that built the peace everyone else took for granted, about how trust wasn't a luxury he'd been allowed. Some nights, the distance between the bed and his couch felt like an ocean. Some nights, it felt like a single breath. On the fifth night, something shifted. She woke gasping from a nightmare, Mira's broken smile. Chains she couldn't see but could feel cutting into her wrists. Before she could even sit up, Constantine was at her side. No crown, no command, just hands steady on her shoulders. "You're safe," he murmured. "They can't touch you here." She didn't know why, but the words unhooked something in her chest. She didn't cry, but she didn't push him away either. He stayed with her until her breathing calmed, his scent wrapping around her like a storm she no longer feared. When he returned to the couch, she stared at the ceiling for hours, pulse thrumming in her throat. On the sixth evening, during a formal banquet, Sarah caught Lady Isadora watching her with eyes like sharpened glass. Her wolf bristled. The room smelled of roasted meat, old money, and challenge. Constantine leaned close, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Don't flinch," he murmured. "They're waiting for you to show fear." She didn't. She lifted her chin and met Isadora's gaze with quiet defiance. The corner of Constantine's mouth curved slightly. Not a smile, but the closest thing he'd shown her yet. It was infuriating how much that small look affected her. On the seventh dawn, Sarah found herself walking the palace corridors alone. The bond hummed in her chest like a heartbeat she didn't control. She didn't love him, not yet, but she no longer hated him either. She'd seen too much of the man behind the crown, and the most dangerous part? Her wolf no longer wanted to run. 7 days. 7 mornings, afternoons, evenings, and nights that tied her closer to him than she ever intended. The storm hadn't broken yet, but it was close. The day Lady Isadora challenged her was the first time Sarah truly understood what it meant to be a queen in name, but prey in their eyes. The sun had barely set when the summons arrived. A formal parchment, sealed in wax with the sigil of House Isadora. A duel, not whispered, not hidden, public. When Constantine read it, his jaw tightened. "She's trying to humiliate you," he said, voice low and steady, "and force the council to demand I choose another mate." Sarah held the parchment between her fingers. It felt heavier than it should have, like a verdict. "If I refuse?" He didn't sugarcoat it. "They'll call you a coward, an unfit queen. They'll tear you apart." The words should have scared her. They didn't. They clarified things. She remembered Isadora's sharp smile at the council. The way the nobles had looked at her, not like a mate, but like a mistake. A mistake they wanted erased. "I'll fight," Sarah said. The air stilled. Even the fire in the hearth seemed to quiet. Constantine studied her, golden eyes narrowing. "You'll fight a trained alpha." "I've fought worse," she replied softly. "I've spent my whole life surviving wolves who thought they were stronger than me." For a moment, something raw flashed in his eyes, half pride, half fury. "If she hurts you, she will try," Sarah cut in. "Let her." The arena was carved stone under a bruised twilight sky. Nobles filled the stands, their voices a low, eager hum. A duel between the king's chosen mate and a noble alpha wasn't just scandal, it was bloodsport. Isadora stood at the center, wrapped in crimson leather, every inch of her calculated to intimidate. She moved like someone born with claws in her hands and power in her blood. Sarah walked out barefoot, her gown stripped for combat, hair braided tight. She had nothing but herself. But for the first time, that felt like enough. Constantine stood at the edge of the arena, expression carved from iron. His presence pressed against her skin like a promise. "If she touches you, I'll end her." But he didn't step in. He wouldn't. This had to be her fight. "Begin!" Isadora lunged first, a blur of speed and precision. Sarah ducked, air whistling past her ear as the alpha's claws scraped the stone where her throat had been a heartbeat earlier. The crowd roared. Sarah stumbled back, steadying her breathing. Too fast. Too fast. Isadora smirked, circling like a predator playing with its food. "Little Omega," she drawled. "You're in my world now." Sarah said nothing. Words were for people who had the luxury of wasting breath. Another strike, another dodge. Pain bloomed along her shoulder where claws grazed skin. Warm blood trickled down her arm. The scent of iron filled the air, and her wolf snapped awake inside her. Enough hiding. This wasn't a ballroom. This wasn't court. This was a fight, and if there was one thing Omega wolves learned, it was how to survive when no one came to save them. When Isadora lunged again, Sarah shifted. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't pretty. It was instinct. Her smaller auburn wolf burst forward with a snarl that split the air. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Shifting mid-fight wasn't common. It was rare. It was dangerous. It was power. Sarah's wolf darted left just as Isadora swung a feint, then a strike low. She sank her teeth into the alpha's flank, drawing blood. Isadora howled. The crowd erupted. The noble's fury was immediate. She shifted too, a massive silver wolf, all muscle and rage. They collided like lightning striking stone, fur and blood and snarls filling the night. Sarah was smaller, weaker, but she was faster. Every time Isadora lunged, Sarah slipped just out of reach, striking when the alpha overextended. A dozen cuts, a dozen tiny humiliations, and then, when Isadora roared and charged head-on, Sarah rolled beneath her and caught her throat in a submission hold. Not killing, not mauling, dominating. The crowd fell silent. Isadora froze, pinned beneath a wolf half her size. When Sarah shifted back, her chest heaved, blood smeared across her arms and neck. Isadora lay on the ground, beaten and gasping. Constantine moved through the arena like a storm. He didn't touch Sarah at first. He just looked at her, at the blood on her, at the fire still in her eyes. "You could have died," he said softly. "But I didn't," she answered, just as soft. A muscle ticked in his jaw. Then, almost against his will, the corner of his mouth curved. "No, you didn't." He stepped closer, his hand brushing a streak of blood from her cheek. His touch was warm, dangerous, intimate. "You're stronger than they know." Oh, Sarah's pulse thudded in her throat. "Stronger than I thought," she whispered. His eyes darkened, something wild flickering behind them. "Exactly why you're mine." Her breath caught not because of the words, but because she wasn't sure she disagreed anymore. That night, the palace buzzed with whispers of the Omega who humbled a noble alpha. Sarah didn't sleep. Neither did Constantine. Something between them had changed, not spoken, but felt. She was no longer prey, and he no longer looked at her like she was a fragile thing. She'd drawn blood and claimed power, and in the kingdom of wolves, that meant everything. The night after the duel didn't belong to sleep. It belonged to silence, the charged kind that hums in the air between two people who are no longer who they were yesterday. Sarah sat at the edge of the bed, bandages wrapped around her arms. The wounds weren't deep, but they burned a reminder of the blood she'd spilled and the power she'd claimed. Outside, the palace was still awake. She could hear the distant clamor of voices in the courtyard, nobles and servants alike, repeating the story of the Omega who had humbled Lady Isadora. Inside the king's chamber, it was quiet, too quiet. Constantine stood by the window, a shadow cut against the silver moonlight. His black shirt clung to his shoulders, sleeves rolled up, hands braced against the railing. He hadn't spoken since they returned. Not after the healers left. Not after he helped her sit down, steadying her when her legs shook. He just watched. "Say it," Sarah finally whispered. Her voice felt foreign in the stillness. "Whatever you're holding back." He didn't turn immediately. His voice came low, rough. "When she lunged for your throat, something inside me snapped." Her pulse stumbled. "I was halfway into the ring before I realized you didn't need me," he continued, finally turning. His eyes burned gold in the dark. "You didn't just survive her. You beat her." Sarah forced a laugh, quiet and sharp. "Barely. Barely is still a victory." He crossed the room slowly. "Not a king now, not a predator, but something in between. Do you know what the court is saying?" She shook her head. "They're terrified of you." Sarah's breath hitched. Not mocking, not doubtful, terrified. "They saw an Omega do what half their daughters couldn't," Constantine went on. "They saw the bond between us isn't just a scandal, it's a threat." Her throat tightened. "A threat to them, not to you?" He stopped right in front of her. close enough that the warmth of him brushed against her skin, like the heat of a fire you can't step away from. "No," he said softly. "Never to me." The silence between them shifted again. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was electric. Sarah hadn't wanted this bond. She'd feared it, but standing before her now wasn't the ruthless king she'd imagined. It was Constantine, golden-eyed, scarred, waiting. And gods help her! She didn't want to look away. "You keep waiting for me to run," she whispered. "I keep waiting for you to choose." His voice was steady, low enough that she felt it more than heard it. "I could claim you right now. The bond would take over. You know it, I know it, but I won't." "Why?" she breathed. "Because I want you to want me back." The words slid through her like lightning bright, burning, undeniable. He reached for her, slow and deliberate, giving her time to stop him. She didn't. His fingers brushed her jaw, first calloused, warm. Her breath caught. His hand slid upward, cradling her cheek as if she were made of glass and wildfire at once. Her wolf rose beneath her skin, pressing forward, aching to close the distance. "You scare me," she whispered, because it was the truth. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "Good. I should." But his thumb traced her cheek with a gentleness that betrayed the words. And in that heartbeat, she wasn't afraid of him at all. The bond hummed between them, alive, hot, thrumming like blood under skin. She didn't know who moved first. Maybe it was him. Maybe it was her. But the next breath they shared wasn't between two strangers forced together. It was between two wolves circling a fire they'd both secretly wanted to touch. Their foreheads brushed, and the world narrowed to the sound of her heartbeat and the smell of cedarwood and storm. "Constantine." Her voice was a breath. His reply was lower than a growl. "Say yes." The bond pulled. Fierce. Unforgiving. Her fingers gripped the fabric of his shirt before she realized she'd moved. His hand slid to the back of her neck, anchoring her in place, but never forcing. "Not yet," she whispered. And his eyes, gods. His eyes burned like he was proud of her for saying it. He stepped back slowly, deliberately, breaking the current between them, but not the tension. "Then I'll keep waiting." Her chest ached in ways she didn't know how to name. That night, Sarah lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling while Constantine took his usual place on the couch. She wasn't sure when the shift had happened, when the fear had stopped being louder than the pull, but she could feel it now, undeniable. She wasn't running anymore. She was standing at the edge of something bigger than fear, bigger than the bond itself. The edge of surrender. The day of the coronation dawned with skies the color of steel. Even the wind held its breath. Sarah stood before the mirror in the royal dressing chamber, draped in a gown the color of moonlight, soft silver silk, embroidered with wolf sigils. A delicate crown of polished moonstone rested on the table beside her, waiting to be placed on her head. It felt less like a crown, and more like a line she could never uncross. Behind her, servants moved like quiet shadows, adjusting the folds of her gown, braiding her auburn hair into an intricate cascade. She barely felt their hands. Her mind was somewhere else, circling the same question over and over again. Who would try to kill her first? A knock. A guard entered, head bowed. "Your Majesty, the king requests you in the council chamber." Her heart thudded once hard. "I'll come." The corridors of the palace had grown colder since the duel, the whispers louder. Nobles bowed, but their eyes were calculating. Ever since she beat Lady Isadora, the court hadn't known what to make of her. She wasn't the helpless Omega they could dismiss anymore. She was something far more dangerous, unpredictable. She found Constantine waiting at the end of the council table, surrounded by his inner circle. Magnus, with his granite stare. Kale, the captain of the guard, leaning against the wall. And on the table unfurled parchment. Constantine lifted his gaze to her, and just like that, The storm in her chest quieted a little. "Come here." She stepped to his side, the whisper of her gown loud in the silence. His hand brushed the small of her back, a grounding weight. Cale spoke first. "We found the letters," he said. "Intercepted last night." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Letters?" Magnus pushed them forward. The wax seal was already broken, Theron's sigil. She scanned the first line, and her stomach turned to ice. Words like poison, assassins, and remove the Omega bled across the page in tight, deliberate ink. "They planned to strike during the coronation," Magnus said. "During the procession, when your guard is split between the crowd and the pavilion." "Theron," Constantine said flatly. "And the others?" Cale listed the names. Lords, ladies, 12 of them. Faces she'd seen smiling in the ballroom, bowing in the hallways. It made her sick. "They want to make it look like an accident," Magnus added. "You die. He's forced to remate. They control the throne." Sarah exhaled slowly. Fear should have been clawing at her throat, but it didn't. Not this time. She was done being afraid. "Then we don't hide from it," she said. "We use it." The room stilled. Even Constantine's gaze sharpened. She leaned closer over the table, tapping the letter. "If we move too soon, they'll scatter. If we pretend we don't know, they'll walk right into their own noose." Cale let out a low whistle. "She's got teeth." Constantine's hand rested lightly on hers. Not possessive, not commanding. A silent yes. "We spring the trap during the ceremony," she continued. "Public. No shadows, no whispers. Everyone sees." "And their punishment?" Magnus asked. Sarah didn't look away. "Exile." A murmur rippled around the room. Not death. Worse for wolves with power stripped of their titles, forced to live as nothing. Constantine's voice was low, edged with something dark and proud. "My queen speaks." For the first time, he said the word queen, like it already belonged to her. The procession wound through the capital hours later. Wolves lined the streets, hundreds, maybe thousands. Sarah rode beside Constantine in a black and silver carriage, his hand resting lightly over hers. On any other day, the moment might have felt beautiful, but she could feel the eyes, the weight of the threat. Somewhere out there, among the sea of faces, someone was waiting for their chance. She didn't flinch. The lunar pavilion gleamed ahead where it had all begun. The night she kissed a stranger and unknowingly claimed a king. She inhaled deeply, full circle. The coronation began in blinding torchlight. Nobles knelt as they entered the pavilion, the crown of moonstone waiting on a velvet cushion. The council stepped forward one by one, pledging their loyalty. Then Theron moved. His voice rang out. "I cannot swear loyalty to an Omega queen." The air split. Isadora and the other conspirators rose with him, a dozen wolves in coordinated defiance. Gasps scattered through the pavilion. And then, the assassins moved. Hidden blades glinted, but so did Cale's. Dozens of royal guards emerged from the shadows, surrounding the traitors in a perfect ring. Sarah didn't need to give the signal. Cale already had his orders. Constantine rose from the throne, alpha power rolling from him like a storm. "Treason," he said softly. "In my house." Sarah stepped forward beside him, voice clear as a blade. "And in front of my people," Theron sneered. "You're no queen." She met his gaze without blinking. "And yet you're kneeling." At her nod, Cale held up the intercepted letters for all to see. The crowd erupted in fury. Wolves did not forgive betrayal of the crown. The conspirators' faces drained of color. Constantine's voice rumbled through the pavilion. "The sentence is death." Sarah laid a hand on his arm. His power paused, a hair's breadth from shattering the room. "No," she said softly but firmly. "Death is mercy. Let them live with what they've lost." The silence that followed was louder than any roar. Even Theron's breath hitched. Sarah straightened her spine. Strip them of their lands, their titles, their names. Send them to the barren territories. Exile. A living death. The crowd's roar shook the walls. Constantine's gaze burned gold as he looked at her not as a fragile omega, not as a political inconvenience, but as his equal, his queen. As the crown was placed on her head minutes later, the roar of the kingdom rose around her. No longer whispers, no longer doubt. The omega who kissed a beggar now stood as the queen of Lycaon, and the traitors knelt in the dirt, tasting the cost of underestimating her. The moon was high by the time the pavilion emptied. The nobles had scattered, the traitors were bound and sent toward exile, and the crowd's roar still echoed faintly through the palace walls. Sarah stood alone in the royal balcony overlooking Lycaon. Below, the city burned with torches and celebration, a kingdom howling for its queen. A week ago, she'd been invisible, a servant, a girl with no future but the one forced on her. Now the night itself bowed. She pressed her hands to the cold railing. Her reflection stared back at her in the dark glass of the window silver gown smeared faintly with ash, hair half undone from the weight of the crown. She didn't look like the frightened omega who once planned to kiss a stranger to escape her fate. She looked like someone who owned it. Footsteps approached from behind. Even before he spoke, she felt Constantine's presence ripple through the air like heat before a storm. "You should be resting," he said softly. Sarah turned. He had shed his ceremonial armor, the black of it replaced by a simple shirt. Sleeves rolled to his forearms. Without the crown, without the walls of politics, he looked less like the king of wolves, and more like the man she'd kissed in the shadows. The man she'd unknowingly claimed. "You should be celebrating," she countered. He walked toward her, not fast, not hesitant, just certain. "I don't need to celebrate," he said. "I already won." Her breath caught. "Won what?" He stopped in front of her, close enough that the scent of cedarwood and storm washed over her again. "You!" For a heartbeat, the noise of the city disappeared. All that existed was the pulse between them, the same pulse that had haunted her every night since the kiss. "I never asked for any of this," she whispered. "I know," he said. "But you chose it." She had. That was the most dangerous truth of all. She could have run. He would have let her. She didn't. "You were never a mistake, Sarah," Constantine continued, his voice lower now, softer. "The moment you kissed me, everything changed. Not because you claimed me, but because for the first time in years, I didn't see a kingdom. I saw a future." Her throat tightened. "I was just trying to escape. And you ran straight into me." His mouth curved slightly. "Into fate." The bond thrummed between them, alive and fierce. He reached for her slow, like always giving her every chance to step away, but she didn't. His hand slid around her waist, pulling her against him. Her breath tangled with his. "Say it," he murmured against her hair. "Say you choose me." Her hands found his chest, steady and solid beneath her palms. "I choose you," she whispered. "I choose us." Something in his chest loosened at those words. His forehead rested against hers, the world holding its breath around them. When he kissed her, it wasn't the desperate kiss of a girl running from her fate. It was the claiming kiss of a queen standing in the center of it. Hours later, the city was still awake, but the palace was theirs alone. They lay tangled in silk sheets, the golden glow of moonlight painting their skin. The bond had snapped into place, fully hot, electric, infinite. She could feel his heartbeat in hers. "I used to think mate bonds were cages," she whispered into the quiet. Constantine's hand traced idle patterns on her skin. "And now?" "Now," she said softly. "I think they're choices, and I finally made mine." He smiled against her hair. "My queen." The word didn't make her flinch anymore. It didn't feel like a crown forced on her head. It felt like a promise. Months passed like falling stars. Sarah changed the court. New Omega protection laws were written. Forced matings outlawed. Rank no longer dictated worth. She walked into rooms where her kind had once been servants and now they bowed to her. Mira, her oldest friend, returned to the palace. Not broken this time. Whole. She worked beside Sarah. A quiet rebellion turned into strength. And Constantine, he was still every bit the king. Fierce. Unyielding. But when the doors closed and it was just them, he looked at her like she wasn't a queen or an Omega or a symbol. He looked at her like she was his, and she looked back like he was hers. On the anniversary of the kiss, the moon hung over the gardens where it all began. They walked hand in hand through the same archway where she'd once seen a beggar in rags and made the most reckless decision of her life. You know, she said quietly, sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd kissed someone else. He gave her a look. No, you don't. She laughed softly. No, I don't. Constantine stopped under the archway, turning her to face him. It wasn't an accident, he murmured. I know. She rose on her toes and kissed him soft, sure, claiming, some stories begin with wars, some with crowns. Theirs began with a kiss, and it ended with a kingdom. The palace was quiet, bathed in soft moonlight. Sarah sat in the nursery, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her stomach. The twins weren't here yet, but she already felt them restless, strong, as if they were impatient to meet the world. The door opened softly. Constantine entered, without his crown or armor, just the man she'd come to love. He knelt in front of her and placed his warm hands over her belly. Still kicking? He asked. She smiled. Like little warriors. His laugh rumbled against her skin. They get that from you. When their foreheads touched, the bond hummed between them steady, certain. A year ago, she'd kissed a stranger to escape her fate. Now, she carried the future of a kingdom. Weeks later, the kingdom howled as the twins were born. One with her hair and his golden eyes, the other his dark hair and her amber gaze. Constantine held them like the world itself, whispering, You've given me everything. Sarah smiled through happy tears. We built this. That night, as the wolves below howled their welcome, Sarah stood on the balcony with her mate and their children. Once an invisible Omega, now a queen, a mother, a legend. The moon had watched it all beginning to end.